want you to start by picturing a fairly typical family. Let's say they earn a decent middle-class income, maybe like $78,000 a year. But there is a massive catch with this family's financial behavior.
Okay, I feel like a catch is coming. What are they doing?
Well, every single year, without fail, they spend $100,000. So to cover that $22,000 gap between what they make and what they consume, they just put it on a credit card.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they take out a loan. And the truly concerning part is that this isn't some one-off emergency. They've been doing this for years. So right now, as they sign the paperwork for yet another $22,000 loan, they are sitting on over $400,000 in total debt.
I mean, most financial advisors would look at that family and immediately say they are careening toward a mathematical brick wall. That level of leverage is just completely unsustainable.
Exactly. You would naturally assume they're completely reckless. But what if I told you that this isn't a family at all? If you take the exact financial situation of the national government and shrink the numbers down proportionally to a household scale, well, that is the exact financial reality we are living in.
That is honestly terrifying when you put it like that.
It really is. So, welcome to the Missing Lessons, where we explain what school never did. Usually when people discuss government borrowing, it just gets buried under confusing jargon, or commentators throw around the word trillions until the stale, it just loses all meaning.
Right. It just sounds like fake money at that point.
Exactly. But today, we are bypassing the noise and the political talking points. In this deep dive, we are examining the actual financial mechanics of sovereign debt to show you exactly how this structural reality impacts your future, the global economy, and the interest rates you pay every single day.
If you're enjoying the Missing Lessons, make sure to follow the podcast, leave a rating, and share it with someone who might find it interesting. It helps us create more episodes and reach more curious minds.
So we don't need to spend time rehashing the basic difference between a deficit, which is just the yearly shortfall, and the total accumulated debt. Anyone following the news knows the bathtub is overflowing. Globally, total government debt recently crossed an astonishing $63.1 trillion.
Which is just a massive, incomprehensible number.
It is, but what often gets lost in these massive headlines is the crucial distinction between gross debt and net debt. Gross debt is the terrifying headline number you see broadcasted on cable news. It is absolutely everything a government owes.
Okay, so then what is net debt?
Net debt is far more revealing. That is the gross debt minus the financial assets the government actually holds and generates returns on. And there is no better example of how this plays out than looking at Norway.
Right, because Norway is a fascinating anomaly in global finance. They effectively operate with negative net debt, right?
Yes, exactly. Technically, they still issue bonds, so they still owe money on paper. But the Norwegian government took their massive North Sea oil revenues over the past few decades, and instead of just spending it on immediate social programs or tax cuts, they funneled it into a sovereign wealth fund.
And that fund is huge now, isn't it?
Oh, it's one of the largest single pools of capital on the planet. It owns roughly 1.5% of all globally listed shares. So the financial assets they hold far exceed their gross debt. They could theoretically liquidate a portion of their assets, pay off every single sovereign bond tomorrow, and still have a staggering amount of wealth left over.
But for the vast majority of advanced economies, we are seeing the exact opposite trend. The net debt is accelerating significantly faster than the underlying economic growth.
Which brings up a mechanical question that constantly gets misunderstood. When we talk about a government owing trillions of dollars, who exactly is sitting on the other side of that ledger?
That's a great question. Because the popular imagination is that the government is just calling up foreign powers and asking for a massive line of credit. Like, are we just heavily mortgaged to other countries?
It is the most persistent misconception out there. While percentage of sovereign debt is certainly held by foreign central banks and international investors, the overwhelming majority of it is actually owed to domestic institutions.
Wait, domestic institutions? Like who?
We're talking about domestic pension funds, local insurance companies, state banks, and individual retail investors. Let's say you put a portion of your paycheck into a standard retirement account or a 401k.
Okay, I'm with you.
Well, the fund managers handling your money need a bedrock of incredibly safe, risk-free assets to anchor your portfolio. So they buy government treasury bonds.
Yeah.
In a very structural, literal sense, government debt is essentially a society owing money to itself.
Let me push back on that for a second, though. Because if a massive portion of this debt is just society owing money to itself, isn't it functionally a wash?
How do you mean?
Like, if my left pocket owes my right pocket 50 bucks. Why does it matter? Why is anyone worried about the debt if the money is staying in the family, so to speak?
Because the family is not a single unified entity. The people who own the government bonds, which tends to be wealthier individuals, older retirees, and large institutional pools of capital, they are not the exact same people paying the taxes required to service that debt.
Oh, I see. The tax burden falls heavily on younger, working-age people.
Exactly. So even if the debt is entirely domestic, it acts as a massive wealth transfer mechanism. It taxes the working class to pay interest yields to the asset holding class. It is definitely not a wash.
Wow, it is a structural redistribution of wealth.
Yeah.
That makes total sense, which is why the mechanics of who holds the debt matter just as much as the total number.
That is a brilliant distinction, yeah. So if we understand what the debt is and the distributive mechanics of who holds it, we have to look at why it exists in the first place. Because historically, borrowing wasn't supposed to be a permanent state of affairs.
Right, it was designed to be a macroeconomic shock absorber, wasn't it?
Yes. If an economy is a car, a crisis is a massive pothole. Without a shock absorber, the axle just snaps. When you look at history, like funding the mobilization of World War II, backstopping the financial system during the Great Recession, or the massive stimulus needed during recent public health shutdowns, governments utilized debt to survive.
Because if they couldn't issue bonds during those catastrophic events, the alternatives would be terrible. They'd have to hike taxes on citizens who are already financially drowning or slash services right when people need a safety net the most.
Exactly. Borrowing allows a society to smooth out catastrophic volatility, and the economic consensus entirely supports that. Utilizing leverage to survive an existential threat is exactly what a sovereign balance sheet is for.
But that makes sense for emergencies. We are running massive structural deficits continuously today. Even when unemployment is low and the economy is doing well, why are we running up the credit card when times are good?
Economists have a term for this, actually. They call it deficit bias. It is essentially the tragedy of the commons applied to modern democratic politics.
Deficit bias. Okay, how does that work in practice?
Let's break down the actual incentives of a politician. To get reelected, you need to provide tangible benefits to your constituents. Voters love highly visible, immediate benefits, like new highway infrastructure, better school funding, expanded health care, or increased military spending.
And conversely, voters absolutely penalize paying higher taxes to fund those things.
Exactly. It is structural myopia. You have a political incentive to deliver the immediate, highly visible reward without imposing the immediate, highly visible cost.
So the single easiest mechanism to achieve both is to borrow the capital.
Right. You get the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the new bridge today, and you quietly pass the invoice to a future generation of taxpayers who aren't old enough to vote yet. The political benefits are concentrated in the present, while the economic costs are dispersed into the future.
It is a systemic flaw in how short-term election cycles interact with long-term financial planning.
It really is. And to justify this perpetual borrowing, you will often hear political commentators push a very specific, folksy narrative. They say the government needs to balance its checkbook just like a household.
We hear that every single election cycle. But structurally, it is a complete myth, right?
It is an incredibly dangerous analogy because a sovereign government operates under completely different physical and legal constraints than a household. First of all, a government has an indefinite lifespan.
Right. It doesn't retire at 65 and it doesn't pass away, so
Exactly.
its timeline for paying things off is effectively infinite.
Exactly. Second, a household cannot legally force its neighbors to surrender a percentage of their income if things get tight. A government has the legal monopoly on taxation. And most importantly, a household cannot venture down to the basement and print its own legal tender to pay off its mortgage.
But a sovereign nation that issues its own fiat currency controls the money printer, which naturally leads to a very logical question.
What's that?
If the government has a printing press, why is this debt even a problem? I mean, if the debt is denominated in our own currency, why don't we just digitally credit the accounts, print the trillions needed to pay off the bondholders tomorrow, and wipe the slate clean?
Because you immediately collide with the brutal reality of hyperinflation. When a central bank monetizes the debt, meaning they just print new money to pay off government obligations, they are not creating any new actual wealth.
Because no new factories were built and no new goods were produced.
Exactly. You are simply taking the existing economic pie and slicing it into millions of smaller, thinner pieces. You dilute the purchasing power of every single dollar currently sitting in your bank account.
We've seen this historically too, most famously with Weimar Germany in the 1920s, right?
Yes, that is the classic textbook example. They tried to literally print their way out of their crushing post-World War I reparations, and they diluted their currency supply so aggressively that the mark collapsed.
People were taking wheelbarrows full of cash to the bakery just to buy a loaf of bread because the paper the money was printed on was worth more as kindling.
Exactly. But it's not just the threat of historic hyperinflation. There is a structural reason why printing money fails to solve modern sovereign debt. We have to look at what the government actually owes money for.
Okay, what are the biggest obligations?
The largest obligations looming on the horizon for advanced economies aren't fixed-rate bonds. They are social safety nets, like pensions, Medicare, and Social Security. These are obligations directly linked to the cost of living and the cost of healthcare.
Oh, I see. So if you print money to pay off your bonds, you trigger massive inflation.
Right. And when inflation spikes, the nominal cost of fulfilling those healthcare and pension obligations skyrockets in tandem. You cannot inflate your way out of a demographic crisis. You are just chasing your own tail while destroying the working class's savings in the process.
So, we can't print the debt away without destroying the currency. And we know the debt is growing exponentially faster than the underlying economy. How much is too much? When does the math actually break down?
Economists track this using the debt to GDP ratio. This is the total accumulated debt compared against the total economic output of the country in a single year. To use a high school analogy, it is like comparing your total outstanding mortgage to your gross annual salary.
Is there a magic number where it becomes a crisis?
While there isn't a magical red line where the sky suddenly falls, comprehensive macroeconomic research points to a threshold. When a country's debt crosses roughly 77% of its GDP, the sheer weight of that leverage starts to actively drag down future economic growth.
And we have a perfect real-world laboratory for what that drag looks like, don't we? Japan.
Yes, Japan. Their gross public debt has completely shattered historical norms. It is over 200% of their GDP, which is more than twice the value of their entire economic output for a year.
And a massive driver behind this is demographic collapse, right? They have a rapidly shrinking pool of young, taxable workers and an exploding population of retirees drawing on government pensions.
Exactly. But Japan hasn't collapsed into a hyperinflationary wasteland. They still function. So you have to ask, how does that debt drag actually manifest day to day?
Yeah, how does it doesn't look like an explosion.
No, it manifests as a slow, grinding stagnation. Japan has struggled with essentially zero economic growth for decades. When a government carries that much debt, the domestic banking sector and institutional wealth become entirely consumed with buying and servicing safe government bonds.
Meaning all that capital is trapped.
Precisely. It isn't flowing into venture capital, it isn't funding risky new tech startups, and it isn't building new manufacturing sectors. The financial energy of the entire nation is caught up in managing past liabilities rather than innovating for the future. You avoid a sudden explosion, but you suffer a decades-long freeze.
And that brings us to the most immediate, visceral danger of high debt. The real problem isn't the giant, abstract total number sitting on a spreadsheet. The real problem is the cost of maintaining it.
Yes, we call this the squeeze. When you owe money, you have to pay the interest rate. Right now, out of every $10 the national government spends, roughly $7 is on complete autopilot.
We should define autopilot because that is terrifying. That means the money is legally mandated by prior legislation to be spent on entitlement programs, healthcare, and servicing the interest on the debt.
Exactly. Congress doesn't even debate it during their budget fights. They're only fighting over the remaining 30% of the budget.
And as the principal debt grows, and as interest rates normalize from their historic lows, those interest payments violently expand.
Look at Brazil. During a recent crunch, the Brazilian government found itself in a position where it had to allocate over 40% of its total tax revenue just to pay the interest on its debt.
Just the interest, not paying down the principal at all.
Just treading water on the interest. If you are an economy surrendering nearly half your revenue just to service the ghosts of spending past, your ability to invest in your future drops to zero.
So it's not just about the total number. It's about the interest payments eating up the money that should be going to modernizing the electrical grid, researching clean energy, or preparing for the next pandemic.
Yes, the interest payments actively cannibalize the future, which brings this entirely abstract macroeconomic theory directly to you, the person listening right now. If you are in your late teens, your 20s, or your 30s, you are the exact demographic that is going to be caught in the squeeze.
Let's do the actual math to bring this down to the individual level.
Okay, if we took the total national debt right now and split it equally among every single household in the country, your household's proportional share would be hovering around $200,000 today.
That is already a staggering number for a median income family to conceptualize.
But look at the trajectory. Based on the current baked-in projections of mandatory spending and structural borrowing, in 30 years, right when today's 20-somethings are in their peak earning years, that proportional share is projected to nearly triple.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we are looking at roughly $700,000 per household.
Now, obviously, the government isn't going to literally mail you an invoice for $700,000.
Yeah.
So how does that systemic burden translate into personal financial pain?
It happens through a phenomenon in the capital markets known as crowding out. Let's break down exactly how crowding out works. Imagine the entire global financial system is a giant pool of savings.
Okay, like trillions of dollars from investors and banks sitting in a reservoir.
Right, looking to be lent out for a return. There is only a finite amount of liquidity in that pool at any given moment. When the government decides to run a massive multi-trillion-dollar deficit, it has to finance it by issuing treasury bonds.
And because the government is the ultimate safe haven borrower, it immediately goes to the front of the line, right?
Exactly. It plunges a massive pipe into that pool of savings and drains a huge amount of the available capital. And this is where the laws of supply and demand take over.
Because if the government is vacuuming up a massive percentage of the available lending capital, the supply of money available for everyone else shrinks dramatically.
Yes. When the supply of a resource drops, the price of acquiring that resource goes up. And in the financial world, the price of borrowing money is the interest rate.
So in order to attract enough buyers to fund its massive deficits, the government has to offer higher yields on its treasury bonds.
Precisely. And because treasury bonds are the foundational baseline of the entire global financial system, when their yields go up, every other interest rate goes up with them. It is an unavoidable mechanical linkage.
Which means the government's borrowing directly inflates your personal cost of living.
Exactly. Because the government is crowding out the capital markets, the interest rate on the mortgage you need for your first home goes up. The APR on your auto loan increases.
And if you are an entrepreneur trying to secure a small business loan to get your startup off the ground, the bank is going to charge you a massive premium.
Right, because they could otherwise just park that money in high-yielding, risk-free government bonds. The sovereign debt actively penalizes private ambition. It is the ultimate manifestation of intergenerational inequity.
It really is. The people enjoying the goods and services funded by today's debt are completely different from the future generations who will have to pay the interest on it.
It's like a group of people sitting down for an incredibly luxurious multi-course dinner at a five-star restaurant, enjoying every bite and then quietly slipping out the back door so the bill is forcibly handed to the young couple just sitting down at the next table.
This changes how you view civic responsibility entirely. And here's a question for you. If you were in charge of fixing the national debt, what would be your first move? Would you raise taxes across the board, cut popular programs, or just keep borrowing and hope for the best? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.
To bring all these threads together, debt in and of itself is not an inherent evil. It is a vital, incredibly powerful financial tool that allows a civilization to absorb sudden shocks and construct massive infrastructure projects.
But because of the structural incentives of modern politics, it's being used to fund daily consumption rather than future growth. We are borrowing just to keep the lights on.
We are, and debt at its absolute core is essentially time travel. When a sovereign nation issues a 30-year bond, it is literally reaching into the future, extracting wealth and resources from a timeline that hasn't happened yet, and pulling it into the present to be consumed today.
The ultimate question is whether we are using that borrowed wealth to build a better future for you, or just throwing a party that you will have to pay for.
It really makes you look at every political promise differently. And I want to leave you with one final, incredibly provocative thought. Because the math of our current debt-to-GDP ratio is so clearly unsustainable, you have to wonder what the ultimate exit strategy is.
Right, what's the plan?
There is an unspoken wager happening right now at the highest echelons of global finance and policy. They aren't planning to balance the budget, they are implicitly betting on a miracle.
A miracle. Like what kind of miracle?
A technological one. They are betting that an unprecedented technological leap, like artificial intelligence or robotics, is going to trigger a hyperproductivity boom. The gamble is that future technology will suddenly cause a global GDP to completely hockey stick upwards.
Expanding the economy so rapidly that today's mountain of debt suddenly shrinks into a manageable molehill.
Exactly. They are betting the financial stability of the next generation on a tech miracle that hasn't fully arrived yet. But if that hyperproductivity leap fails to materialize, well, the math eventually runs out. If you enjoyed this episode of The Missing Lessons, don't forget to follow the podcast, leave a rating, and share it with a friend. Your support helps us continue exploring the topics school never taught us.